For most of my life, it was an article of faith that the people who rose to the top levels of government, especially in the foreign policy worlds in both the United States and in Europe, were intelligent people. Many times I would disagree with some of their policies, but they were intelligent people who had a good idea what they were doing, and they pursued it to whatever degree they felt was necessary given the circumstances at the time. I strenuously disagreed with some of the things they were doing, but for the most part, it was something that was based on something rational and logical. I'm not sure that's the case anymore, because now we're into a situation where it's not so much that I disagree with policies, though that certainly does still exist. It's that I can't get a grasp of the world vision that many of these people in both the United States and in Europe hold to even what is reality. And that is a source of frustration, as you've known if you watched our show for any amount of time. But we are going to continue to follow our mantra of being unintimidated and uncompromised to bring the truth and what's true on the ground. And one of our favorite guests to help us do that is the ever popular Larry Short Johnson, former CIA analyst, and the I guess the host of Sonar21.com, or the author. I'm not sure how to say that. What's the right?
I'm like the dairy farmer. I got to milk the cows every day.
And we're milking the truth actually every day too. We're certain to appreciate that. Let's just, in fact, I want to start off with something that's on your sonar21.com, because that kind of got my eye this morning, even before we get into some of the specifics that we've had here. This got my attention. Besides losing the proxy war in Ukraine, NATO also is losing the economic war with BRICS. Tell us a little bit about what led you to that conclusion.
Well, when you pull back and look at the economic data that's coming out, despite the claims that NATO is going to provide X billion of dollars to Ukraine, and that they're going to buy all these weapons from the United States, every single one of the major NATO countries, industrial countries, have a debt to GDP ratio of 100% or greater. In fact, Macron just yesterday, or the day before yesterday, announced that France may have to seek an IMF bailout, International Monetary Fund bailout. Their economy is doing so poorly. The German economy right now, it shows up as roughly 70% debt to GDP ratio, which sounds pretty good, except it was just 3 short years ago, that was a 50%. So in other words, it's now borrowing money at an accelerating rate because its economy is in recession. It is losing industrial capability that's moving out of Europe, actually some moving to the United States. By contrast, Russia's debt to GDP ratio is 19%.
Wow.
Less, it's dramatically less, which means in an event of an economic crisis, Russia has plenty of room to maneuver, to borrow money, whatever. It has, where it's not going to put its economy under strain. Whereas the United States is right now at 125%. When you compare the economic growth rate of the BRICS countries of Russia, China, India, Brazil, and South Africa, and others that are members, Vietnam, Iran, the average economic growth rate right now in the BRICS countries is 4%. What is the growth rate in the GDP for NATO countries? About 1.5%. So not even from an economic growth standpoint, the West can no longer compete. The West is in debt. The West industrial capability is shrinking, whereas the industrial capability of Russia, along with its BRICS partners, is growing. And just this week, we've had some amazing data released. As a result of Donald Trump's brilliant tariffs, China has stopped buying all liquid natural gas or propane out of the United States. That previously was buying $4 billion worth. Last year, $4 billion. They've gone from $4 billion to zero. Soybeans that used to be, China was a number one purchaser of soybeans from the United States, gone. China said, no, we're not buying from you anymore. They've taken that. Coffee. China has now lined up all the coffee contracts that used to be between Brazil and the United States. They're now between Brazil and China. The United States coffee drinkers are going to be facing higher prices. It's going to be definitely inflationary.
But by the way, what's the impact on American soybean farmers if China's not buying them? What is that going to do to us?
Yeah, how are they going to? Where are they going to sell them? So their market to sell is down, and on top of it, they've had excellent production. The amount of soybeans they've got has gone. The big supply. Same with corn. Well, when you get that happen, that means the price of it goes down. Well, they've taken out loans to buy farm equipment, tractors and such, as well as they've mortgaged part of their lands. They actually could be in a position where they're going to have to foreclose or be bankrupted. So it's very bad news for the American farmer, and they're starting to put pressure on the Trump administration. Also, we saw yesterday, remember, because you and Doug McGregor talked about this, where Trump said, hey, 600,000 visas for Chinese students. And Doug was saying, man, I don't understand. I can explain. It's real simple. Those 600,000 Chinese students go to American universities and they pay full tuition. There are at least 30 to 40 colleges that depend on that Chinese money to stay open. They have been putting intense pressure on the Trump administration to reverse this. But, just now Trump said, okay, yeah, we'll give those Chinese the visas. What's happened in China is the Chinese parents are saying, you know what? A, it costs too much money to send our kids to the United States. B, when our kids come back, they can't get jobs because they are viewed with suspicion. And rightly so, because one of the dirty little secrets that's not commonly commented upon is that when those Chinese students come here to the United States, gee, who do you think is involved with trying to do spotting, assessment, and recruiting? Oh, that would be my old organization, the CIA, because that's one of the ways the CIA can get access into China to put human assets on the ground. You start cultivating people, you develop relationships with them. But now we cut our nose off to spite our face with that Trump's initial ban on these visas. So that 600, he didn't just pull that out of the air. That came because of domestic political pressure in the United States. The tariffs are backfiring on him.
Well, and in light of all these economic factors you're talking about here, we'll circle back around to the military stuff because they're intimately connected.
Yeah.
And let's look here at Zelensky from yesterday. You'll have to read the bottom of the screen on this one for the CC on it. He's going to be talking about we need more economic pressure and use more of these sanctions and see if this time they go front fire instead of backfire.
Все буде залежати виключно від волі лідерів світу, передусім від Сполучених Штатів Америки. Щоб тиснути на Росію, потрібні нові кроки, новий тиск, санкції. Ми говорили про це з генералом Келлогом вчора. Ми працюємо з американцями дуже змістовно. Після нашої зустрічі в Вашингтоні ми маємо нову основу для спільної роботи. Росія дає сигнали виключно про те, що збирається і надалі ухилятись від реальних перемовин, і це можна змінити тільки сильними санкціями, сильними тарифами, справжнім тиском, активні операції, захисні наші операції. Ми будемо все це продовжувати. Інших варіантів.
So for those who may have had a difficult time reading the closed caption at the bottom of the screen, the gist is that Zelensky is saying, hey, the only language Russia understands is pressure, and they're not even engaging in real negotiations. So what we need to do is more sanctions and more tariffs, and that will kick things loose. What say you?
He's crazy. I mean, what are we going to sanction Russia on that hasn't already been sanctioned? I mean, there's nothing left. Tariffs? There's virtually no trade between the United States and Russia. And if the stuff we will put tariffs on, you processed uranium, which we need in our nuclear reactors, and nitrogen for fertilizer, which we need. All we're doing is shooting ourselves in the foot if we go that route. And if we go that route, Russia will say, okay, fine. It's not a critical part of the Russian economy. And we've tried to do it indirectly by threatening, oh, we're going to sanction China and India. India, it's remarkable that in the, I think Doug pointed it out on your show, in the last, this week, Trump has tried to call Modi, the prime minister of India, 4 times. Modi's ain't picking up the phone. I don't want to talk to you, you buffoon. The Indians are legitimately pissed off at Washington because when Joe Biden was in place, they were being pressured to buy Russian oil. Why? To stabilize the international oil market. Now they're getting pressured to not buy the oil, and they're just looking at America and said, "Can you make up your damn mind? You guys, you keep sending mixed signals." What has really made the worm turn with respect to India on this is that the entrepreneurial class in India had been the biggest proponents of closer ties with Washington and doing, basically trying to do Washington's bidding. After this combined with Trump's bogus claim that he stopped the war between Pakistan and India, not true. Completely rejected by Jai Shankar, the foreign minister, and by Modi, the prime minister. So now the entrepreneurial class is basically saying, screw the United States. We're going to work closer with China. We're going to work closer with Russia.
Well, in fact, let me just tell you, this is from current. This is from 5 hours ago. 5 things to know. The Indian tariffs have gone in. So according to CNN here, President Trump has followed through on his threat to double tariffs on imports in India to 50%. The move aims to punish the 5th largest economy for importing Russian oil. What do you think is going to happen because of that?
Yeah, they're going to suspend probably critical pharmaceuticals. That the only suppliers of these are China and India. So China's already suspended some. India suspends some. Then we have a problem because a lot of the pharmaceuticals are produced there. So India is not going to succumb. All Trump has succeeded in doing is driving India and China, which have been at each other's throat for the last 50 years over territorial disputes. But now all of a sudden, Modi is calling Xi. He's going to be with Xi starting Monday at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meetings, followed up by attending the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II for China, celebrating that with the Chinese. The Chinese foreign minister, Wang Yi, he was in Delhi just last week. So all of a sudden, India and China are saying, you know what, we got to work together against these Americans. So, Trump lives in this fantasy world where he thinks that we're still the center of the universe. And just because the dollar is still a major factor in international trade, that we can control, dominate, and dictate. Well, those days are over. And we are watching a rapid transformation of BRICS into an independent and powerful economic force. The GDP of BRICS, the economic growth of BRICS, exceeds that of the G7, which is basically the United States, Canada, Europe, and Japan.
And what do you project that this is going to do? As I recall, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's 30 some odd countries that are in the process of either being partners or trying to be members of BRICS. Yeah. What does this say to the remainder of the countries in the world as they look? Do we want to stay with what has been for better part of a century, the West economic model, which has been very reliable and stable, or do they look to the East here? To this growing BRICS embankment?
Oh, they're looking to the East. For BRICS offers the chance you're not going to be bullied. You're not going to be threatened. You're not going to be sanctioned. So what's happening now, you notice the dollar continues to fall in value. The dollar is in decline. Now, in sort of traditional macroeconomic theory, hey, if your currency's cheap, that means people can buy more of your products. So if the United States was a major industrial power, then we'd find that our products might go up in demand. That would be good for our economy. But the problem for the United States is because it's so heavily indebted. We spend we take in $100 a month, but we're spending 125. Well, and when you do that every day, all of a sudden you're not just $25 in the hole. Over the course of 20 days, you're now $500 in the hole. And over the next 40 days, you're $1,000. So that number of the debt keeps mounting up with each passing day.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the service on that debt is north of $1 trillion. Is that right, per year?
Yeah. So we're
unbelievable.
We are in the throes. We're really on the threshold of a financial catastrophe, and it's not just the United States. It's NATO as a whole. So at the very time we're trying to confront Russia militarily, and we cannot because we lack the industrial base to do so, we no longer have the economic power. And so one of the things that's driven the price of the US dollar down is less demand. So on this big coffee deal that Brazil just cut with China within the last 2 weeks, and this shows you how dramatic the situation has changed. Because normally, if you were a Brazilian coffee exporter and you wanted to get into the Chinese market, you'd have to fill out this document and go to this approval and get this review. And it could be a 6 month to a year-long process. The Chinese did it in one day. They just take all that red tape, throw it away, come on in. And that deal is done in terms of renminbi, the Chinese currency, and Brazilian reals. So they're not buying dollars. They don't have to go out onto the foreign exchange market and say, okay, here's my Brazilian currency. I want to buy US dollars, and then I'm going to give those dollars to China, and then China is going to go convert those dollars into its own currency. No,
and correct me if I'm wrong. But that's an actual contract, meaning there's actual real money being exchanged here, as opposed to these big, beautiful deals that Trump's been doing with Japan, South Korea, the European Union, which on paper and Saudi Arabia has hundreds of billions of dollars where they're going to invest in the United States. But that's all in theory. There's no actual contracts behind any of that.
Right. It is. It's Wimpy from the Popeye commercial. Those who are, our age can remember that. Wimpy. This is guy. Oh, I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on. We got these promises.
Oh, hey. Lord, we're wimpy. We're wimpy.
Yeah.
Oh man. That's not a good image. But let me just carry that one step further here, because in light of all the things you're talking about here, and I'm camping out on the economic part of it first. You may recall, I think maybe even the last time we were on, but certainly in the past, you have made the comment that Trump seems to be motivated by whoever he talked to last, right? Yeah, right. So first of all, in Alaska, he listened to President Putin and changed his whole issue from seeking an unconditional 30-day ceasefire to instead, let's have a negotiation first, and then we'll worry about that. And then came Washington, where he had Zelensky come in. Well, seems like Zelensky was the last guy in his ear, because here's what Trump said yesterday.
Alaska, you had mentioned that there would be severe consequences if Vladimir Putin did not agree to a ceasefire. Yeah. After that summit that was rolled back, given the negotiations, is he back on the clock now?
I want to see that deal end. It's very, very serious what I have in mind if I have to do it, but I want to see it end. I think that in many ways he's there. Sometimes he'll be there and Zelensky won't be there. It's like, who do we have today? I got to get them both at the same time. But I want to have it end. We have economic sanctions. I'm talking about economic, because we're not going to get into a world war. I'll tell you what, in my opinion, if I didn't win this race, Ukraine could have ended up in a world war. We're not going to end up in a world war anymore, but it would have ended up possibly in a world war. That would have been they were ready to trot. But just like India and Pakistan, we're going to end up in a nuclear war if I didn't stop.
Wow. Yeah, he's going to bring economic pressure on Putin. And if not for Donald Trump, we probably would have already been in a nuclear war. What do you say to that?
The man's become increasingly delusional. He lives in his own fantasy world. Look, Trump refuses to acknowledge his own responsibility for facilitating and enabling this war. Every single day that he allows U.S. military supplies to go forward to Ukraine, every single day that money is given to Ukraine, whether directly or indirectly, every single day that intelligence is shared, every single day that U.S. advisors, particularly from the CIA, are on the ground in Ukraine helping, he is facilitating the war. So, he can live in his little fantasy world where he pretends that that's not the case. But he also talks, serious sanctions on Russia. He has no cards to play, to use the metaphor that he hit Zelensky with at the end of February. He's got nothing. What you're gonna, as I noted earlier, you're gonna stop buying enriched processed uranium from Russia. Okay, go ahead. You're going to hurt your United States more than you're going to hurt Russia. Same with the nitrogen, the fertilizer. Of course, given how his tariff policy is working to hurt American farmers, they may not need that fertilizer because they won't have any land left to plant on. Okay, I mean, good God, this is, it's embarrassing. Frankly, I am embarrassed to watch him talk about this.
Yeah, well, it doesn't get a whole lot better. So there again, you see, because we showed you that Zelensky clip at the beginning where he says the only language Russia understands is pressure. And now here Trump is again going back talking about potential for economic pressure, et cetera. Doesn't seem to be having any impact on Russia so far because, and I believe this was earlier today, Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, was asked, hey, this whole thing about security guarantees, the West is saying it needs to have some Western European NATO military members as part of the contingent here. And they say, what is Kremlin's position? Here's what he said.
Europe is putting forward proposals for security guarantees for Ukraine, which include, in particular, a European military presence in Ukraine and observers from certain third countries. What do you think about these proposals?
We are negative about this and have said so at various levels. There is no such thing as a European military. There are the militaries of individual countries, most of which are NATO members. NATO's military infrastructure and its infiltration into Ukraine are among the root causes of the conflict. This is why we are negative about these discussions.
Yeah.
It sounds odd that there doesn't seem to be any change on the Russian side.
Yeah, they've been consistent. Putin is a lawyer. People say, he is KGB, implying that he was, some lethal assassin creeping around in the shadows, sticking pins in people. He's a friggin' lawyer, okay? And anybody that's been to law school knows, and this is not just in the United States, you're taught a particular way of thinking. And part of that is assessing risk. You're always assessing the risk, whatever, I've used the joke in the past that to illustrate why you need a lawyer, that when I first was in a condo on the beach, I rubbed the lamp, out came a genie and said, you got one wish. I said, I want to be on the beach with 3 scantily clad women. Wish granted. It was then that I discovered I should have consulted a lawyer because the 3 women that showed up were all 85 years old, okay, in bikinis. So the lawyer would have stipulated, lawyer would have stipulated age, weight, But the point is, so Putin
really important to get into the details. Let me just say,
Putin approaches this from the detail standpoint. They first, in April of 2022, were willing to accept a deal. Russia was willing to accept, as Lavrov has said to me personally. He said in the interview with Kirsten Welker the other day, a deal that would have left Donetsk and Luhansk, the Donbass, in Ukraine under Ukrainian flag, but there would have had to been some special protections for the Russian speakers. Fine. That was rejected. Okay. The next deal on the table was presented in June of 2024 by Vladimir Putin when he spoke to the foreign ministry. And in that, now it's a different deal. All of a sudden, the 5 oblasts, that's Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk, those 5 oblasts that have all voted to join Russia Federation, they are now permanently part of Russia. So Putin's not going to negotiate that away. The West can say, oh, you only control 75% of it. Doesn't matter. He's keeping, those are Russia territory. They're not giving it up under any circumstances, period. End of discussion. Not going to happen. Then the other thing he insisted was NATO's got to get the hell out of Ukraine, and Ukraine's got to get the hell out of our territory. And then we can negotiate an end to this war. Otherwise, we're going to keep moving forward. And you know what? If we keep moving forward and taking other territory, we're going to keep that too. Been very clear on that. They've said it over and over and over. But we think they're kidding. No, they don't mean that. No, they do. And that's the problem. That's the problem with Trump.
Now, with most in the West, and we're going to see some more examples here in a minute, but we had Ambassador Polyansky, Russian deputy UN ambassador, here on the show a couple of days ago, and he made that point verbatim to me that you said a second ago. He went back to the 2022 and said every time we've offered diplomatic off-ramps, the next time they're worse conditions and worse terms for the Western side. And he said if this one doesn't get taken, I don't even know what may follow next, but it won't be as good as what's on the table here. But we don't believe it. I'm going to get to you a second why I think that many on the West don't take that seriously. But first of all, I want to show you something. This is a kind of a combo clip here. It's got both Trump and Lavrov, Trump at the beginning of it, and both of them, to one extent or another, talking about the legitimacy of Zelensky to even sign a deal should one be made.
The issue of who is going to sign the deal on Ukrainian side is a very serious issue. When we come to a stage when you have to sign documents, we would need a very clear understanding by everybody that the person who is signing is legitimate. And according to the Ukrainian constitution, Mr. Zelensky is not at the moment.
I want to get it to stop. And it will not be a world war, but it will be an economic war. And an economic war is going to be bad. And it's going to be bad for Russia. And I don't want that. Now, I have to also see, because not everybody, Zelensky is not exactly innocent either.
Just wondering if the Russians have been relaying this to your team, if they view Zelensky, as a leader worth signing a peace deal with, if they will.
Doesn't matter what they say. Steve can answer, but I can answer too. Doesn't matter what they say. Everybody's posturing. It's all bullshit, okay? Everybody's posturing.
So you see that Trump, he doesn't believe anything the Russians say. Just BS.
Yeah, I mean, candidly, Trump needs to pull his head out of his corpulent ass to say something so abjectly stupid that they don't mean it. They absolutely do mean it. And I come back, Putin is a lawyer. Under the Ukrainian constitution, there were supposed to be elections a year and a half ago. But Zelensky suspended the Constitution, suspended the law, and declared basically martial law where he's in charge. He gets to continue to be in office. And from Russia's standpoint, that's not, if let's say legal order is restored to Ukraine, if someone could make the case in the courts in Ukraine that all the actions by Zelensky subsequent to have him declaring that martial law, the suspension of the Constitution, that all of his decisions were unconstitutional and could not be respected, which means from Russia's standpoint, any agreement that he enters into is not relevant. So that they're not making a debating point. Lavrov and Putin are strictly, these guys, they take the written rules and written laws pretty seriously. And that's the problem in the West. We don't think they pay attention to it. They absolutely do. They go over every single word, every single phrase. So, Trump in that I'm appalled by his behavior, by his ignorance. And what makes ignorance so dangerous is when it's accompanied by hubris. He can, throw his weight around. Go ahead, apply sanctions. It shows he doesn't even understand the true state of the Russian economy. Would you rather be the United States, where you're 125% over 100% of your income? Your debt to GDP ratio is in the negative. Or would you rather be Russia, where there's 19%? Would you rather be Russia, where you can produce all the artillery shells that your army needs to sustain combat on a daily basis, or be the United States, who cannot supply enough for Ukraine to stay in operation for 3 weeks? Would you rather be Russia, who can fly its astronauts to the space station and back, who can service all of its modules in outer space, or the United States, who has to come to Russia and say, can we get a ride? Huh? Can we go along with you? I mean, for God's sake, America has got to stop looking in the mirror and pretending that it's the evil stepmother, wicked stepmother. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? The mirror's paid to lie to you. Oh, you fat bastard, you are great looking.
Yeah, you had to go down that whole list there.
Oh my God.
Well, as it turns out, I referenced this earlier, part of the reason why no one either believes or just doesn't listen to Russia in terms of what they're going to do and what they need on the battlefield, and why they continue to push for maximalist gains on the West, is because they don't believe that the situation on the battlefront is as bad as what's claimed. Here is one of your favorites, Bill Browder, talking about how actually Putin's in a panic.
Putin puts on a brave face. He pretends everything is fine. He doesn't care. His war is going well. He's absolutely, panicking back in his bunker about all this stuff, because the only way that he can carry on doing this war is if the Russian people don't turn on him. And it's easy to prevent the people from turning on him if he's got money to slosh around out there. And he's been sloshing it around pretty well, paying soldiers a lot of money, paying the families a lot of money, etc. But if the money dries up, then he's got a problem.
So this guy is so knowledgeable and so deep in his intimate understanding of the Russians that he recognizes that they're all driven by money. And if the money dries up, then they'll abandon Putin at the first sign of trouble. What do you say?
Well, again, referencing Browder, whose grandfather was the founder of the American Communist Party, and his father, so he has strong ties back to the old communist ideology. Alex Craner has written an excellent book on that. Hey, so let's talk about popular support. Here's Browder. I think he's living in the UK now.
That's my understanding.
He's talking about the panic Putin, who's got 80% public approval in Russia, compared to Keir Starmer, who's got 20% approval. I don't think Browder understands the meaning of the word panic. Okay. Somebody, maybe it's like a second language for him. Somebody needs to go reading the definition. That he would be correct that if the economy in Russia was tanking, but as I pointed out, right now the economy in Russia, they put in measures to control inflation. That meant they raised interest rates last October to 22%. They're now down to 18%. So they've dropped them because they brought the growth rate down from 4.7% to 1.5%. However, in the UK, where Browder's living, the growth rate is 0.2%. Essentially, it's stagnant. It's in recession. So, the Putin and the Russian economy, they're doing fine. They've got room for error. They've got room for recovery. They've got natural resources. They're not, one of the reasons that you worry about economic growth and finance is, geez, if we need to borrow money, can we borrow money? And will they want to lend us the money? Russia doesn't need to borrow money. It's got what it needs internally, and they are very fiscally conservative, something that we don't know anything about in the West. So, Browder, Browder may be, the unusual, that communist who becomes a billionaire and and has made money off of exploiting his old family ties. But the fact of the matter is,
Wait, but I thought the whole thing about communism was redistribution of wealth and to give the money to the proletariat and all that kind of stuff. So
no.
Why is he keeping all that money? I mean, I'm thinking there's something wrong with this picture.
You're right. It's the redistribution of wealth. I'm going to take your money and give it to me. Okay, I can use it better than you.
Yeah, maybe that's where the redistribution's coming in. But the problem is that a lot of people listen to him, and that's why he keeps getting put on, these shows, and because he says the story that a lot of people want to hear. And of course, people who are listening to it who don't watch the Daniel Davis Deep Dive or go to sonar21.com, they may believe what they're being told here. And then you add on to that. Here's another interview on British media today of Francis Farrell, who is a reporter for the Kiev Independent. And for those who may recall, if you notice, we've actually had him on our show once before because he was given at the time some pretty frank and honest assessments of what he had seen at the front line. There seems to have been some change in him, because here's how he, and I think this was earlier today, is characterizing the war in Ukraine.
The Russians, they seem, they sometimes seem to be picking up the pace on the battlefield, but it's important to understand that the Ukrainian defense remains stable. Yes, they have huge issues with manpower, but for now it remains stable, and any of these Russian gains are coming at huge costs because that's the only way they know how to attack. They're not able of making big breakthroughs. They're not capable of this. So there's a lot of pain still ahead, but if Ukraine can just hold the line and work on improving its solid defense, eventually the question of why does Russia stop will be answered by the fact that they just don't have any more people to just keep throwing into this meat grinder.
That is just nearly the most bizarre thing I've ever heard, to suggest that the Ukraine side can wear down the Russian side. All those things that you've already mentioned about economics, production capacities, natural resources, manpower. And even he started off this conversation talking about how, well, I know we have a huge problem in his terms with manpower, but we have stabilized the front, and now then the Russians will be ground down till they can't fight anymore. How do you see that?
Yeah, this is a Ukrainian version of Baghdad Bob. You remember when you were in a tank driving into Iraq, Baghdad Bob was insisting you weren't there. You see Danny waving out of the hatch of the tank. Here we come. The facts on the ground simply tell a different story. That the typical criticism out of Jack Keane and all the Ben Hodges and all these generals is to say how slow the Russian advance has gone because they haven't taken that much territory. Well, that would be a fair criticism if Russia said, you know what, we need to take 100% of Ukrainian territory by 2025. But they've never said that. All they said from the beginning is we're going to demilitarize Ukraine. Well, one way to demilitarize it is by killing their soldiers, blowing up their tanks, blowing up their armored personnel carriers, destroying their airlift, whatever remains of air power, which is exactly what Russia's been doing. And yeah, one of the reasons for the slow advance is Russia prefers to use drones, to use bombs, to use artillery. They're not going to send their soldiers forward in human meat assaults. They're not doing that. In fact, they've shifted their tactics to the point that once they soften an area up, they'll send in 4 to 6 guys on motorcycles, and then they quickly storm the positions.
We showed a clip from Denis Davidoff, who is a pro-Ukrainian war mapper who usually does a pretty good job. He's definitely pro-Ukraine, but he also talked about how the other day in the Kupiansk area, how Russia used exactly those tactics with the DRG groups, small groups of 2 to maybe 5 guys moving in there, and then they would move more infantry up forward, which is the same thing they did north of Pokrovsk. That penetration was stopped, but it hasn't been reversed. That's the key issue there.
Yeah.
Russia continues to move forward there. Now in Zaporizhia, there's a new penetration going on, et cetera. But the casualties keep mounting every day for the Ukraine side. and they simply don't have the wherewithal to replace the casualties. And one other interesting thing, I'd like your take on it to the extent that you know. We showed a report yesterday from, I think it was Oryx, that showed that in the last 6 months, and in the last 4 months in particular, there has been a significant reduction in the number of Russian tanks, armored personnel carriers, and artillery pieces that have been destroyed. So a substantial reduction in that. They didn't talk about any kind of casualties, where the Russian human casualties had gone down or not, but they said they noticed a significant drop off in that. And then you see stuff like this in Kupiansk and in Pokrovsk, where it seems to be an acceleration in the use of infantrymen and motorcycles and dune buggies. Why do you think that changed here in the last?
Well, yeah, one of the big changes has been on the drone front. So the Russians have developed attack drones that attack other drones. So the way that the Ukrainian drone system had worked, they would send in, let's call them surveillance drones. They could be up at 4,000 feet, so they could see the area and they could identify where targets were points of vulnerability were. Well, what the Russians have been doing now over the last couple of months, they've got drones that attack those surveillance drones, so they're taking them out. So now all of a sudden Ukraine is blind, because they don't have this, they can't see what's there immediately in front of them, which is one of the reasons that if you can't see it, you can't shoot it, and they don't have a signature on it. So, that's one of the most important reasons why you've seen a decrease in the number of attacks on tanks, on artillery pieces,
especially artillery, because you have to be deep to be able to see where the artilleries are to target them. Fast, I didn't.
Now, the other thing that's happened is the Russians have become more sophisticated in developing these cages, these anti-drone cages around their tanks. So it used to be that, 1 or 2 drones could hit a tank and disable it. Now you got to hit them with like 12 to 20 drones to disable those tanks. So, and in the process, when Ukraine has to use that many, it's not like it's got some mass production facility in the rear where they're cranking it out. So Russia has a decided tactical advantage on all aspects, whether it's number of troops, trained troops, supplies, being able to sustain logistics at the front lines, medical care for those who are wounded. We've seen in the recent exchanges of bodies, the Russians received 19 dead soldiers the other day, and they turned over 1,000 dead Ukrainians. So a 1 to 20 ratio is just about what's going on. And that has been actually consistent over the last 6 weeks, that Ukraine is not inflicting the same number of casualties on Russia as are being inflicted on Ukraine. And the problem for the Ukrainians is that just because you have some warm bodies at the front doesn't necessarily mean that they're trained.
Yeah.
And there are other reports that are surfacing that a lot of these new recruits, once they arrive on the front line, they do the old Monty Python tactic of run away, run away.
Yeah, and that's it's just it's anguishing to think of the human cost to the Ukraine men and to the Russian men as well, because this war shouldn't have been going on. But I'm especially concerned and troubled that so many in the West who say they are the champions of the Ukraine side are actually the enablers of the death of the Ukraine soldiers on a massive scale. And no tears seem to be shed on that. But we're not figure that one out.
We're not paying any price.
We're not. Yeah,
we pay zero price. And so what? A bunch of Ukrainians die. That's we don't even consider them real human beings in the West. It's just they're like a piece of toilet paper to be used and then tossed away or flushed away. So,
and then we'll talk about how proud we are of them and they're heroic and all this, and pat them on the back as they go to their graves. That ain't helping their families any. But
it's an evil policy and strategy.
Truly,
and Trump continues to enable it. Unfortunately,
right?
He pretends that he's some sort of bystander in this. This thing would end tomorrow if he just told Zelensky, "Okay, you're done. No more military aid, no more intelligence, no more money."
Well, and I think, Larry, I think that Trump kind of signaled his intent, because the question that we had after the Alaska meeting was, okay, well, Trump is going to be put into a box here pretty soon where he's going to have to make a hard decision. Do you walk away, or do you say, all right, well, we'll just keep going with what we're doing here, and darn it, I tried, etc. I think that it's going to be the latter, because from the Oval Office earlier this week, he kind of bragged that, hey, we're not spending any more of our money here. We're just getting it from the Europeans. We're selling them our stuff. So it looks to me like Trump is just going to be content with just letting the system roll, and we'll make money, as he said during that clip. Yeah. And it's funny because he caught himself and he goes, well, I mean, I don't want to do it that way, but I mean, we are making some money here. So what that implies is that if no decision is reached here in the next couple of weeks, which is the so-called deadline he gave, that the status quo will just continue on, and I don't think anybody will change. Do you see it differently?
No. Yeah. Remember his last he rarely has met a deadline that he's kept. And, we saw that even when, he accelerated from a 50-day deadline to a 10, 12-day deadline. And then that 10, 12-day deadline came due in Anchorage, and he didn't pull the trigger. He'd issued deadlines before for Hamas, didn't pull the trigger, thankfully. But again, it gets back to the question, what trigger is he going to pull?
Yeah.
I mean, I can give you an empty gun and you can pull that trigger all day long. You're not going to fire a single shot, but that's what Trump is actually shooting with.
Yeah, I think he'll put some blanks in there to make noise, make it look like something.
Yeah.
But like you said at the start of the show here, he's got no leverage, and so whatever he slaps will just be for performative basis.
What the United States needs to do is have actually Russia as a friend, not a foe. But while I believe actually Trump may want that and genuinely want to do that, the problem is the propaganda that has saturated the American public, that is prevalent in the media. And we saw that in the questioning of Kristen Welker with Sergei Lavrov on Sunday. There's such hostility. There's such a depth of ignorance, profound ignorance, and unwillingness to actually entertain that Russia has some fair points in its case. In fact, just today, news came out that they've unclassified a variety of documents from the 1990s. And, in the past, we were told that it was just Jim Baker that promised that NATO would not move one foot to the east. No. Now there are at least 8 different members of the West, not just Baker, but George H.W. Bush and members of European communities that made similar pledges to Gorbachev that no, we will not expand NATO to the east. All lies. Yeah. And, understandably, the Russians say, you know what? We trusted these folks and they played us for fools. And, as the old expression goes, fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me. It's now on me because, you got away with it once because I was too trusting, but I should have learned from that not to trust you.
I think they have.
Yeah.
Listen, in the last few minutes that we have here, I want to shift gears to a kind of a new and odd situation that's kind of brewing up here. And it's kind of gotten to the point to where Caroline Leavitt's actually addressing it here. And it's a new a move rather, to send U.S. warships off the coast of Venezuela.
President Trump has been very clear and consistent. He's prepared to use every element of American power to stop drugs from flooding into our country and to bring those responsible to justice. The Maduro regime is not the legitimate government of Venezuela. It is a narco-terror cartel. In Maduro, it is the view of this administration, is not a legitimate president. He is a fugitive head of this cartel who has been indicted in the United States for trafficking drugs into the country.
Okay, a U.S. destroyer is not going to stop any drugs, and it's not going to arrest Maduro. So what gives?
Well, it's not just the destroyer. My understanding is they've put in a Marine amphibious unit out there too, or also a KMU, expeditionary unit. Is a sort of a threat to land Marines in Venezuela and try to take territory. Now, I guess Trump's never been to Venezuela. and maybe some of the DoD military planners have never been to Venezuela. I have. When you arrive at the international airport, which is down on the coast, from there you have to travel up a narrow mountain road that is, the number of ambush positions there along 40 kilometers, quite numerous. So in any attempt to put U.S. troops in via helicopter going into Caracas, Caracas sits in the middle, surrounded by mountains. So they could be easy targets for shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles that I'm sure Venezuela does have an ample supply. So this has nothing to do about Venezuela's status as a narco state. For God's sake, that was Colombia. Colombia is where the cocaine is cultivated, where the cocaine is processed, where the cocaine is shipped, not Venezuela. Now, has Venezuela participated in using drug money? Absolutely. Have they had ties to connections with members of the cartel? Sure. But so has Philip Morris. So has John Deere. So has any number of U.S. corporations I could mention who have taken drug money from the drug cartels. They've accepted the drug money in exchange for selling their products, which the drug cartels use as what's called trade-based money laundering. So, if Trump was really serious about wanting to do something about the drugs, he would go after the U.S. corporations that are accepting that drug money. He would go after the U.S. corporations that are facilitating the drug trafficking. It would be, you shut down the money, you shut down those cartels. But Maduro's a sideshow to this. This is all about going after Venezuela and oil and gas. And it's about the fact that Venezuela has cooperative relationships with China, with Russia, and is now a member of BRICS. So this has not, we're using drugs as a cover. It's a lie. What's alarming is Tulsi apparently went along with the politicization of the intel community because the chairman of the National Intelligence Council, someone that you would have been overseeing if you had gotten the job, was removed from his position along with the deputy. The NIC has a responsibility of preparing national intelligence estimates. And apparently they had been tasked with doing an estimate or an assessment on Venezuela. And the White House didn't like the conclusion.
They were supposed to find that Tren de Aragua was funded by the government so that we could declare the government as a terrorist organization.
Correct.
And they said there's no connection.
Correct.
So they got fired.
Yeah, exactly right. And, the reason you fire, the reason an intelligence analyst or the manager of an intelligence analyst should be fired is if they have actual intelligence and they suppress it or they lie about it, then absolutely fire their ass. That is inexcusable. But it doesn't appear that that's what took place in this, is at least my understanding, that they had information that the White House didn't like. Well, welcome to the world of Lyndon Baines Johnson and then George Allen at the CIA in 1968. White House didn't like the CIA's numbers then. So this is not something new, but what it just underscores is that Trump is politicizing the intelligence. And Tulsi, if she had an ounce of integrity in her at that point, she should have resigned. So I'm not going to stand by and let you lie about the intelligence. Instead, she went along. So whenever you participate in that kind of, you say, well, it's not a big lie, so we'll just go along with it. You've lost your integrity, in my view.
Yeah, and that's not a minor one either. Because it's the very thing that the whole administration's accusing the previous administration to do.
Exactly right.
Politicizing intelligence. So it's
which they did. They did absolutely.
Yeah,
they did.
I know. They did.
Yeah.
It's clear that they did. Some of the stuff that they're being accused of is absolutely legitimate. But when you do the same thing and return it and then just say they were the bad ones, then all you do is continue to undermine anyone's trust of anyone who's in charge with the intelligence because they politicize everything. But
correct.
Let me get off that. I don't want to get on that one. But let's just, I guess the last point here is what is possible to accomplish anything here that's marginally useful for the United States, because obviously we don't want drugs coming in, et cetera. And you just mentioned some of the things we could do there. But what are the risks of having this military formations just floating around in the water off there?
Yeah, it's a waste of money. It's meaningless symbolism. It goes back to the old days of U.S. gunboat diplomacy.
And actually, let me ask you a more pointed question. If with this formation here, if nothing happens, and I just showed on the map there a second ago that route you were talking about, where all the ambush points could certainly come along, that would be easy for the Venezuelan side to actually have a very painful process. We probably never make it up that road with the small amount of troops that MU has anyway. So if we either don't do anything, and God forbid we should even attempt it, but does that not leave Maduro in a stronger position even in his own country?
Yeah. He's following the Houthi model. Let the United States beat its chest. Let the United States make threats. Maybe the United States is going to launch some attacks. But at the end, when we come to the end of this, you'll find out that the United States is going to have to retreat, and not having accomplished what it set out to do, which then sends another message. Hey, the U.S. can be beaten. All you got to do is stand up to them. Don't surrender. The Houthis have done it. Now the Venezuelans will have done it. And so all Trump is doing is damaging the reputation and status of the United States. And so, this deploying the warships to do what? When you can actually be far more effective putting in very strict requirements for U.S. banks and U.S. corporations to not traffic in narcotics proceeds, which they do. Clear. I mean, I've been involved with this. We had a situation under Barack Obama when Eric Holder was Attorney General. So me and my two partners had actually made a deal with the government of Mexico that we were going to file a civil racketeering suit in the United States against Wachovia Bank for money laundering, because Wachovia Bank was doing like $800 billion in drug trafficking money. And Eric Holder then flew after our visit. We actually had a contract in place. He flew down to Mexico and warned them, if you do this whole list of sanctions was going to be unleashed on Mexico. So the government of Mexico backed out. So why go after the banks that are facilitating the drug money? Because those banks, those companies, those corporations that put money in the pockets of Democrat politicians and Republican politicians. And you don't rock the boat, baby.
Yeah, unless you want to have that money. So yeah, not a good situation here, but at least we have a little bit more understanding. So, but in all these things, we appreciate you as always coming and cutting right to the chase and giving us the bottom line. Anything new there in Sonar 21 you want to highlight besides what we started off the show here?
No, just if you're bored and got nothing better to do, go to sonar21.com. I guarantee it'll put you to sleep. So
wait, that's not true.
No.
That's false advertising. It'll actually enlighten you.
I'm lowering expectations so when they get there, go, God, this isn't so bad. Whereas if I say it's the greatest thing you'll ever read, they go there, they go, yeah, it's nice, but
That's CIA stuff coming through again.
Absolutely.
All right, man. All right. Well, appreciate you today. And by the way, we'll be coming back to you later on this afternoon with Patrick Henningsen. Trump talks peace but sells bullets, and we're going to look at some other stuff in the Middle East as well. Always an interesting show with Patrick Henningsen. Tune in at 3 p.m. Eastern time today, and we will see you then on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.